Sorry, I thought it was automatically recording. Okay, sorry. So yeah, we are recording all the classes, and I will be adding the video every week, inshallah, after the class. Okay, so you can refer to the videos here in this folder as well. All right. So we've got these two new folders here. All right. So and I've added the readings to the WhatsApp group. I know that there's some students that are sitting in the class, they can't access Blast. So I have added that to the WhatsApp group, the link for all the readings. So all you sit-in students now, you should have access to all the readings every week. All right. Any questions or anything about that? So you please feel free to let me know if because sometimes this Zoom is a little funny with the screen sharing. So sometimes I think I'm sharing something that you guys can't see. So if that happens, please let me know, yeah? So I'm hoping you're all looking at Blast right now. If not, please let me know, yeah? Feel free to use the chat box, or you can just interrupt and say, you know, doctor, that's not what we're looking at. No problem. All right. So anyone want to share before we start? If not, we're going to do an icebreaker. All right. So usually I like to start a class with some kind of icebreaker, or if students want to share anything about their research, if they have questions, anything they'd like for clarification, whatever. But tonight we're going to do something that I call heart work. Because I'm of the philosophy when I teach that I really believe that learning is not so much a mind-to-mind activity. I believe it's a heart-to-heart activity. So learning is from heart to heart. Okay. So what I would like to do is I'd like to start, because today's reading presentation, which we're going to get to in a minute, is a chapter about, it's really about youth and how identity is formed in youth. Okay, so youth and identity, the role of society, since this is a class in youth and society. So the role on society and societal factors on shaping young people's identity, okay, their sense of identity. So with that in mind, I was hoping to, Mutiara, yeah, you're presenting, I see. Start off the class by asking you all this question. And I'll ask myself as well. I will answer this question as well. One of the things that shapes a young person's identity, which we're going to read about, or we're going to hear about in a minute, is the people that helped raise us, helped us to become socialized in society. And so, of course, parents, for most people, parents are one of those important figures that does that helps play that role. But there's other adults that we come across in our lives as young people that shape who we become as people later in life. Okay, so I want you just to reflect for a couple minutes on this question here, as I've written. As a young person, if you could think about and name one adult who had the greatest impact on your life, and why do you think that is? Okay, just take a minute to reflect on that, and then I'd like to hear people's responses. If anyone would like to volunteer, you can write it in the chat box, or you can share with us verbally through Zoom. That's fine. Okay, so go ahead and take a minute, think about it, and then once you have your answer, let's share, let's discuss. So who'd like to go first? Anyone? Any volunteers?
How about parents, doctor?
Parents, okay. Yeah, that's an obvious one, right?
Yeah.
It's easy to understand why parents would be. Okay, Amira also said parents, mom and dad. But can you think of why? What are some of the reasons why? And how they shaped who you became as an individual in terms of your identity, how you think of yourself now. Mutia, you're still quite young. I would imagine you're still quite young. You look quite young. So as a young
Yeah.
person, you're still a young person. So in what ways do you think your parents have shaped who you are?
Um, yeah, I could say that my identity is actually shaped by the teachings of my parents, their values, their principles that that we have in the family somehow. Yeah.
Name one of those values. Can you name one of ththose values or one of those
Be
principles?
honest,
Huh?
be honest,
Be
be
honest.
honest.
Be honest.
Yeah,
Okay. Good
honestly,
value.
yeah.
Good value. Okay. All right.
And then
And,
another thing that is really significant in my family is education is really important. Yeah, that's it.
okay. All right. So they emphasize the importance of education. And I'm sure with that, they probably try to model that behavior. So, for example, honesty, you can't really preach to someone about being honest without yourself being honest, right? It's quite hard to really get the message across if you're not practicing what you preach. Right? So, in fact, in along those lines, I would echo what you said, and in fact, I can even point to one specific uh, situation or event that happened with my own father, teaching me the value of honesty. There's a few actually that I can think back, and I remember that there were some really, really, really powerful lessons he taught um, uh, around about being honest. I can even remember specific events where that message really got through to me very clearly. So yeah, parents I think are a really important one. Uh, Anybody else have anyone else other than parents that you'd like to point to in terms of shaping your identity? Of course, research on this always points to parents as the main socializing agent when it comes to identity development in young people. But they're not the only ones. They're not the only ones. Anyone else? Who else? Come on.
Prof.
Okay, okay. That is
I
go
hear
first.
two voices. I'm so excited. Okay.
It's okay. The guy should go first. Then I will.
I should go first.
I thought
Men
lady
first.
first.
Okay.
Okay, man first. Okay, it's me, Mahfuz. Okay, for
Mahfuz,
me, I have in every stages in my life, they will be one person who give
okay.
great impact. For example, during my childhood years, 7 years and below, obviously my parents.
Yep.
But then after 7, most of it will come from my teachers, and
Okay.
also from sometimes characters from my comic book.
Interesting.
Which, yes. And then after that, during 15 years and above, colleague are those who give impacts towards myself.
Colleagues.
Yes, yeah, my colleagues, during my secondary school.
I see.
So
Okay.
some of them not. Some of them give positive impact. Some of them also give negative impact.
Right.
But from them, I learn which one is good and which one is bad. And
Yeah.
after that, during my working years, and also I look towards my mentor, my higher manager, my upper management, my superiors who have shown their good qualities.
Yeah.
For me, those who give virtues, good virtues, those really give back impact. Not those who speak, for those who tell, but those who shown their personalities that give a great impact towards myself.
Interesting. Great answer, Mahfuz. Thank you for sharing. You really looked at it across, sort of a developmental perspective. You sort of started with your, childhood and then all the way up to your adulthood. I thought what you said about comic book was really interesting because I think especially with young people, heroes. I mean, that, and then nowadays we have all these, you know, Marvel comics and movies and all these things, but heroes play a very important role in a lot of young people's identity. Sports heroes, you know, they may be religious people, they may be musicians, you know, even, you know, nowadays they call icons and all these things, artists and stuff. But yeah, I mean, the power of role models, yeah, Mutiara, power of role models. So very interesting that you mentioned that. We often forget that. We think about, you know, parents and teachers and family and all that, but yes, especially for young kids, young people, that's a really important one. And I think I like what you said about, see, identity is not only about the positive things, right? Because who we are as individuals, I mean, you know, we may think of ourselves as being pro-social and constructive human beings, but at the same time, there are also negative people out there that have a negative influence on us that does also affect our identity development, you know. So for example, if you were to interview you know, someone who's locked up in prison, you know, for committing, you know, crime or whatever, if you ask them this question, they'll say, well, my identity was also shaped by people, but they had a negative effect on my development in terms of identity development. You know, they influenced me in negative ways, and that's also part of identity development. It's who we are, who we become, and how that happens. It's not always the good things. It's not always the positive people. All right, like you said, even peers in high school, sometimes they have a negative effect on us, right? And so that sort of shapes us in different ways, or it creates conflict within us as young people as we grow up, right? So that's why identity development is it's a very tricky thing. It can be quite complex with certain young people, because they have this mix of very positive and very negative influences on their development, right? So I think you touched on a lot of those things there. Thank you, Mahfouz. There's a couple. Oh, sorry. Who was the other? I'm sorry. Who was the other young woman who was gonna speak, and then you came at the same time as Mahfouz? Who was it? I didn't see the name.
Me, I'm daughter.
Okay. Hannah.
Okay, I think, yeah.
Do I
I
call
think
you Hannah?
I have this, again?
Sorry, do I call you Hannah? What do you go
Yeah,
by?
yeah. Yeah, I prefer to be called by Nana.
Oh, Nana. Okay, Nana. Sorry. Go ahead. Share, please.
Okay. I think our parents is the pillars to develop our identity,
Okay.
like moral values. But in adulting, I think environment will be the major role to help anyone to become either good or bad adult.
Okay.
Environment including social status, like the guy said before, colleagues, peers, teachers. Sometimes all of our surroundings will give effect on our adult. Okay, I think. Sorry.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, no, Nana, that's a great answer. Yeah, and that's society. I mean, talk about youth and society. That is the role of society, is what, you know, the different factors and the different people involved in the environment that shape us. Teachers are a big one, and what we're seeing in nowadays with teachers is, unfortunately, the role of teachers has really changed in terms of shaping young people's personalities and character. I think, you know, if you ask the older people about their experiences with teachers, you know, like and even Mahfouz, you mentioned teachers as well. You know, if you think back to who were your, you know, those really memorable teachers are usually the ones that, you know, there was something about them that just showed how much they cared about you, you know, about your well-being, about your, you know, you as a person, more than just what grades you got on your exams, right? You know, and I can even think back to a 5th grade teacher I had who was just, you know, I was just really close with her, you know, and it was just, the relationship was so close, was so good, that stuck with me until today. So nowadays, of course, unfortunately, teachers don't really have the time to help young people develop themselves in terms of their identity, in terms of their character, because of the way school is structured now, and the emphasis on exams and results and so forth. That emphasis on relationship building is just not there. We know this from research. I'm doing a fairly big study in schools now, and we talk to teachers, we talk to students, we talk to principals. And they tell us these things, you know, they just don't have that kind of time to really develop those kind of relationships, which is really a shame, because if they looked at it from this sort of youth and society, sociological, developmental perspective, they would know how important those relationships are, right? So I think that's a good example. So Huda, I see you quote, you have a comment here. Oh no, there's several comments. Okay. So Hadi said, my secondary teacher, I was in boarding school. Boarding school may be different. She's like a real mother to me, taking care of me when my parents were far away. Her kindness inspired me to strive. Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what I was talking about, Hadi. Thank you. So that relationship, right? It's not just about the grades. Those relationships that we have with teachers. And maybe boarding school is a bit different because of the fact that you're away and you're in an isolated environment. Maybe you do have more time with teachers. That may be a big factor. So yeah, so Mutiara role models. So Huda said along phases of development, there will be someone being role models, inspiring to be role changes as the setting of individual differ. Yeah, everyone, of course, it's a very unique process. Identity development is a very unique process, right? How we develop as individuals, our identity, and our identity is really, it's a reflective mechanism. It's how we perceive ourselves, right? But how that, and what we're going to learn about in a minute in the articles, how that develops is through our relationships with others. Okay, and we'll see why in a minute. Peers also, so Fatin said, peers also play an important role in developing one as a person, especially in the teenage life, and working environment, due to sharing the same interests or facing the same life problems. Yeah, and anybody who, if you're a parent and you're raising teenagers, or maybe you're still quite young and you remember, being a teenager not long ago, or maybe you're a teacher, you work with teenagers. Peers play a huge role in that process of identity development, and this is why school is such an important socializing context for identity development, because of that constant interaction with peers. It has a huge effect. So yeah, okay, great. Good answers, everyone. Thank you for participating. So that was just to sort of get the conversation going, break the ice a little bit. This is really the topic for today's presentation and discussion. So I thought we would just start with just a little bit of reflection. Okay. So with that, let's now transition to our presenters. And who are our presenters today? Our presenters today. Okay, so let's see here. Let's check our slide. Okay, so Amira and Mutiara. Okay, I think you guys can share. Go ahead and share. I've done the settings, so you should be allowed to share your slides. So if you just want to put up your slides, we can get going.
Doctor, it said that I cannot start the screen share while the other participant is sharing. Okay, done.
Okay, that's probably my fault.
Yep.
Can you now?
I'm trying.
Okay.
Yep. Can you see my slide?
Yes. And they look great.
Thank you. We're trying hard to make it very young and vibrant. So yes, Dr. Latif mentioned, So today's topic is all about. I'm sorry. Yeah,
sorry.
Yes,
I just want to remind everyone how this is going to go. So you're going to present, and I'm going to keep interrupting you. Okay. So just to give you a fair warning. Okay.
That's very good, Doctor.
Okay. Yeah. So it'll be a discussion. You guys will be leading it, and I'll be chiming in, and then also everybody else in the class is also welcome to join in as well. Okay. So you guys take the lead. So go ahead.
Dr. Latif mentioned before, the topics for this week is team making. Before introduce our team member, we have Amir here. Amir, maybe you could introduce. You can unmute and then say some things, perhaps.
Assalamualaikum.
Yeah, and then you have me, Mutiara, and okay, and then next, wait a second. Oh. Okay, so in this topic, we're going to me and Amira are going to fully cover the meaning of identity, youth transitions, and some factors affecting youth identity construction. Okay. So next, so chapter 1, identity, youth transitions, what you need to know. So the first thing that you need to know is you have to understand the meaning of identity. So identity actually enables you or individuals to define the contours of their own selves in relations to others. So it means that it somehow defines your characteristics, which I believe it's different from one person to another person. It is also constituted through practices of classification, boundary definition, and the making of meaning that these practices entail. It can be thought of as both individual and social. So when you think about identity, it's actually concept in in types of identity, your personal identity, and also the identity, your social identity. Yeah. The development of identity is influenced by their social place and positions, which this explains the environment. However, young people can also, so which means that you can craft identity is actually constructed by the socials. What I understand is that youth is actually the product of the environment. Like Mark 1859 said, it is not the consciousness of men that determines their existence, but their social existence that determines their consciousness. In a simple word, you can actually understand that it is the ways in which people think about themselves, their place in the world, and their relations with others. Oh, sorry. Okay, wait a second. Okay. So their relation with other people is shaped by the kind of society in which they live. Um, as I mentioned before, identity can also constructed individually. So, you can understand I can be who I want to be. Like Bowman 2004 mentions that people are no longer born into their identity, for example, in terms of social class origins, but they are actually required to make or construct identity themselves. Identity become less a package of received personal characteristics and understood as a more narrative or a story defining meaning of where they have come from, who they are now, and where they want to go. I think this is what Prof. Latif has mentioned it before about it is about identity is actually a process, a continual process on reflections of who you want to become. Yeah.
Okay. Are you done with the slide?
Yep.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
with the help of
Can you go back? So usually what I'll do is I'll let you present the slide and then
yeah,
I'll comment. Yeah, usually it's easier that way. I usually won't interrupt you in the middle of the slide. Usually I'll let you finish the slide and then we'll discuss. Because you have a lot of there's a lot of good information here. I just wanted to take advantage of and make some notes. So let me start by saying this chapter is from a book written by Dr. Simon Bradford. He's from the UK. He's actually a friend of ours at UPM. We've done work together. And he's a sociologist. He's also a youth worker by training. So even though he's speaking here more from a sociological perspective, but he's also done a lot of practice with youth in terms of youth work. So he's got a lot of experience as well. Now you have to understand that this is written. He's from the UK, and it's written with that sort of cultural bias. Everyone has a perspective that they're writing from when they write, especially academics. So his theoretical bias would be he's coming from a sociological perspective. He's a sociologist, and he's a practicing youth worker. So he has those two sort of theoretical biases. But his cultural biases, of course, he's from the UK. So he's more or less speaking to a UK audience. But it's interesting because we should know that. You should always have that. When you read something, you should always know where it's coming from. It's really important that you do that because everything is culturally and theoretically situated. Okay, but he has that's not to take away from what he's writing, but it's just important that we're aware of these things when we learn and we take information from other people. So a lot of the things that you've emphasized here are very important. So the first thing, meaning of identity. I like the fact that he mentions the making of meaning. And in the article itself, he talks about how identity is constituted through the practices of classification. Okay, so how young people classify themselves. Now, in the UK is a very class-based society. So, whether you're from the working class or the ruling class or whatever, it's a very big it's a very important classification in that society of what class you're from. Okay, I think Malaysia is a less class-based society, although some of you may disagree with me on that, but a less class-based society, even though, of course, every society has its class, its socioeconomic classification. Boundary definition, okay, we get into boundaries a little bit later, but the making of meaning is what I'm after. Identity and how young people make meaning of their lives is very important, and it plays a very big role in identity. So how young people make meaning of their experiences, of their relationships with others, their own sort of status in society, what class they come from, and where they fit in society, all these things. So the meaning of identity has many different layers, right? There's many different layers to it. And like you said, Mutiara, I think it's true. It's both individual and social. Of course, we are a product of our social environment. That's very true. But I think we are also born with a certain God-given identity, which interacts with our social environment, right? Social context. And that's where you get individual differences. That's where you get uniqueness, right? You have the individual sort of coming into interacting with the environment. So both of those I think are important, and we have to keep both of those in mind, right? Have you guys ever heard of the debate between nurture versus nature? What is it that shapes an individual and who they become? Is it their inborn nature, basically how they're born or what they're born with, or is it the society that shapes them? Is it nurture? Is it how they're socialized? Okay, so this used to be a big issue. Is it nature or nurture? Well, eventually they've pretty much come to the conclusion that it's a combination of both, and that's what makes our identity so unique, who we are. It's a combination of both those things. Okay, so but in this course we deal mostly, of course, with the social role of social place and position and so forth, and how that constructs young people's identities. So identity construction, as you mentioned, has changed a lot. Now young people are often involved in the work of crafting their own identities. So if I were to ask you guys, 200 years ago, if you were born in Terengganu on the coast of Malaysia, and you were born into a fishing village, kampong, kampong, what's it called? Nilayang? No, that's not. Huh? Fishing village. Yeah, like a fishing kampong, If you were born into that kind of environment, would identity be much of an issue for you? Think 200 years ago, this is, before Malaysia became a modern society, right? And you're growing up in this sort of very traditional fishing village. Your father's a fisherman, your grandfather's a fisherman, your great-grandfather's a fisherman. The expectation would be what? You're going to be what?
Fishing.
You're going to be a fisherman. You're going to be a fisherman. So basically your identity is inherited. It's basically passed on, right? It's given to you. The young person is not really involved in crafting their own identity or sort of creating their own identity like young people are today. Go on Facebook, look at Twitter. What is it? It's all identity work. It's young people presenting themselves to the world, and they're in this project of identity crafting, how they're projecting themselves to others, how they want to be understood and seen by others. They're projecting a certain identity, but they're also, in that process, they're also forming an identity, right? So there's this, this is very fluid kind of identity development process that goes on today. It's very different than in past times. And that's one of the things that he emphasizes here. Okay, so yeah, it's a product of the environment. I can be who I want to be. That's a very modern kind of idea. I can be who I want to be. It was never like that before. This is a very recent idea, right? So the quote here: identity became unless a package of received personal characteristics. Received personal characteristics. If you look at history, again, things were given to young people. It was expected that they would become certain things, right? And understood more as a narrative, a story, or a story that defines meaning of who they are, where they come from, and where they go, right? Life is much more fluid now for young people in terms of defining themselves and who they are. Very little is actually handed down to young people today, right? So it's a very different environment, different world for young people to undergo this process of identity development, right? So any comments, questions, anything you want to add before we move on?
Doctor, I want to ask.
Yeah.
Why we even bothered to craft our own identity?
Why we even bother? Well, who would like to answer Mutiara's question? Not that there really is an answer per se, because it's a good question, but it's a very difficult question to answer, really. But who would like to try? It's a good question.
I have that questions in mind when I read the readings.
Yeah. Is it something that we do consciously?
I don't think so. I don't know. Perhaps yes, maybe not.
I don't think so either, and I honestly don't think it's something that sociology can answer. I think it's more of a metaphysical question. It has to do with the purpose of life itself, and who we are as individuals and what we are as individuals. It's just part of the life course, is that you come into this world as an individual, and well, I mean, the sociologists would say, well, because of the fact that we have relationships with other people, we have this need to identify ourselves as individuals, right? So how am I different and unique from Mutiara, right? So it's a lot of unconscious, subconscious work to identify how I'm different than you, how I'm similar to you, and through that process I begin to understand myself, which is one of the reasons why, if you've ever met people that have undergone a lot of hardship in their lives, especially young people who have undergone a lot of difficulty, hardship, and so forth, when they get older, they tend to be a lot more mature than like young people who are born into a lot of privilege, because they've had so many hard experiences that have really taught them about themselves. They've done a lot of that identity development work through force, through no choice of their own, but just because of their circumstances, and it's really through those difficult times. I mean, you guys are all graduate students. I'm sure, you've also experienced this in different ways. Other people have had difficulties, trials in life, that are very hard. It's through those hardships that we really begin to understand who we are as people, right? So there's always, of course, from our religious perspective, we always say that there's always wisdom, there's always hikmah in difficulty and trials, but it's from an identity development perspective, it's very true. We really figure out who we are once we're tested, so to speak. That's all identity development work. So I don't think it's avoidable, Mutiara. You have to, if you're an individual in life, you're going to try and it's just instinct. It's natural. You're going to do that work automatically, right? But we will touch on this a little bit more as we go along. If you get to the individualization part of your presentation, that's where they talk about it. Okay, so please keep going. Continue.
All right. So I continue.
Okay.
Sorry.
Next
Hello.
slide.
All right. So, with the help of resources.
Oh, your connection. Uh-oh. connection is not very good.
Doctor, can you wait for like 2 minutes?
Sure, we'll take a break. 2-minute break.
All right, because I need to make sure of the connection first. Wait.
Sure, sure, sure. Go ahead. Anybody want to add anything or discuss? I know there's some comments here. Sorry, I wasn't looking at the comments. Okay, so someone, oh, okay, so Nana mentioned you might be someone who's a traditional housewife, was a fisherman husband. Yeah, and I mean, in that pre-modern sort of time, housewife was an identity, right? That was passed on. It was expected, right? It was expected. So there was no, but that's in terms of social role, but that doesn't necessarily shape you as an individual. Everyone's different, of course. But in terms of your social role, your place in society, it was very much handed down to you, inherited. Okay, you're back.
Yeah, I'm back. Okay,
Oh, it sounds
let me
better.
continue. Yeah. So with the help of resources available such as technology, fashion, music, sport, education, and other cultural artifacts, as youth grow up, they can actually develop the kind of identity that they want, and it becomes possible for them to imagine future different from those implied by received identities. So I kind of translated into one sentence like what you can see on in my screen. My past is
We're losing you again.
what my future holds. Yeah. Hello, can you hear me?
Okay, it's cutting. It's like in and out. Okay, you're okay now.
Okay. So yeah, actually, we as a youth, young people, we can actually develop our own identity that is different from the one that we received when we were in childhood. Yeah. So we can kind of like imagine future that is different from our past. So some of the additional terminologies to understand this is by Bowman, 1991. The experience of contemporary life coming project of the South.
Yeah.
Or you can also say the elective biography, the reflective biography, the do-it-yourself biography by Beck and
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, so again, this idea of,
So,
oh, whoops. Yeah, so this idea of the received identity versus the, and there's different names for it. There's different terminologies for it. This idea that people are constructing their own identities much more nowadays. So different theorists refer to as different things like as you mentioned, the elective biography, reflective biography, the do-it-yourself biography. Giddens refers to it as the project of the self, okay, and this kind of thing. But it's everywhere. You can see it in everywhere. Everywhere young people are communicating, everywhere where they're engaging. It's this idea that people have to tell a story about themselves, and you can actually see it if you look at people's like Instagram, right? If you were to, and they're doing studies on this now. They're doing sociological studies on this, where they are trying to study patterns of behavior on things like Instagram and Facebook, and how people present themselves says a lot about their this idea of identity and who they are, or who they perceive themselves to be, has a lot to do with how they project themselves to others, right? And so it makes, I think in my opinion, I think in a lot of ways it makes youthhood, being a young person, difficult. I mean, it's hard. It's challenging. It's wrought with so many different threats, and it's not easy. You know, this pressure to feel like you have to always project your identity to the world. I don't know. What do you guys think about that? Do you agree or disagree? Do you think it's easier and it's better for young people nowadays?
and
No one has any thought on that? Harder. Someone said harder. Yingsha said harder. Why do you think it's harder? Got quiet.
Because there are so many force factors surrounding us, perhaps, Prof.
So many what? Sorry?
Force factor.
Force
That means
factors.
so many pressure,
Oh, okay.
and it creating conflicts within the individuals.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of evidence. There is a lot of evidence to that. Young people, yeah, I mean, it's supposed to be an age where things are supposed to be more entertaining and fun and exciting. And yet, if you look at the data, we have a lot of young people who are experiencing lots of anxiety and stress and depression, and there's been a lot of studies linking it to this sort of online world of, you know, broadcast yourself, project yourself to the world, this need to project yourself in so many different ways. And that's all identity work. That's all this process of trying to form this identity. And so much of it now is public, right? Where in the past, so much of it was private. It just happened in, you know, in your home, within your family, and maybe with some friends. Now it's to the world. You're projecting yourself to the world. So that creates all kinds of, like you said, tensions. And of course, it does lead to conflict. And a lot of young people, they're just not capable of handling all that conflict. You know, they're just not ready for it. They're not prepared for it. They don't, you know, they're not trained for it. I mean, if you look at some of the, you know, like chat rooms and the comments on different things, I mean, some of the comments are just, you know, they're unbelievable. They're shocking, right? So dealing with all that is also part of identity development, because they're trying to figure out, well, you know, who am I and what do I think, as opposed to all these other people out there. And it's really a lot for a young person to take on. You know, it's really a lot. So anyway, I mean, this may be a personal bias of mine. I'm just putting it out there. You know, you don't have to agree, but there is a lot of data to show that is actually what's happening. You know, there's a lot of data. So there's some good comments here. Nana said there's a phase of life at 12 to 14, psychosocial stage, identity versus confusion. Yep, we will touch on that in future classes. We're going to discuss about the developmental stages. And if we can't overcome this stage, the next stage will be more miserable. Yeah, and it's called arrested development. There's a term for it. If you don't sort of go through those stages in healthy ways, they come back to haunt you later in life. And there's a lot of evidence to that. And then Yingsha said, families of doctors and teachers also have a tradition of professional inheritance. Yeah, many pressures when you're in society. This is really true. And, you know, a lot of people think, oh, well, if you're wealthy and you're well off, you don't have these pressures because everything's so easy. Well, yeah, but like you said, there's a lot of pressure because the expectations are so high of a lot of those young people, you know, to follow in their parents' footsteps and to be highly educated and all that. So it creates more stress for young people, you know. And in some cultures, they're even expected to be certain professions, like you're going to be a doctor, and you have no choice in the matter. So that is a form of inherited identity, right? So yes, I would agree with you. It's definitely a form of inherited identity. There's a very famous, maybe it's not very famous, but it was in the newspaper. A few years ago, there was a student from University of Malaya in Malaysia. He finished his doctorate, his doctoral degree. He became a doctor, his MD actually, not doctor, his MD. And then at the graduation ceremony, he walked up on the stage and he took the diploma. And then he walked off the stage, and as he went down off the stage, he went to his parents and he gave the parents the diploma. And he said, "Here, Mom, Dad, this is for you. I didn't want it."
Oh, wow.
Yeah. You know, and to me, that's a very sad story, but it does sort of speak to this idea of inherited identity. Like, you know, the parents wanted him to be a doctor and he did it. You know, he was obeying his parents, you know. But again, it's about identity development and who he was and who he wanted to be, right? So yeah, these are real pressures for a lot of sort of upper middle class young people. They have those kind of pressures as well, even today. So, okay, sorry, Mutiara, continue, please.
It's okay, doctor.
I'm stealing your thunder, as they say.
No, it's okay. It's fine. That's why it's called discussion, right? So youth as transition, what does it mean? So it's actually a transition means, I mean, as you can see, youth has been understood as a time of transition from childhood to adulthood, which is really clear. The use the term transitions points out the dynamic process factors that shape life course and its constituent pathways that can be understood in terms of both time and space. So meaning that transitions actually involve so many changes. That's why it's called dynamic. So what change actually? What are the changes? The changes you can actually see from first like physical and bodily transitions, such as sexual and biological maturity, transition in cognitive, thinking capabilities, development of new skills and abilities, changes that involve transition from one identity status to another, and also an acquisition of more or less independence and autonomy. So the youth transitions also constitute a pattern in social environment. For example, in the UK, which I just took it from the book. In the UK, youth transitions are structured by social differences such as class and gender, and it is also influenced by the micro settings like family and school of everyday life. So what I can conclude is actually the youth transitions from one particular society is actually different from another society because it's really cultural based. And another way to understand youth transitions is actually to understand their, what is it called, the transition metaphor. So one of them that I read in the readings is actually the special metaphor from, is it Wine? I think Wine and White, 1997. Correct me if I'm wrong, doctor.
Yeah, yeah.
So they say,
Win and
yeah,
white.
they say that, yeah, Wine and White. So they say that young people are understood as being situated on a landscape that is mapped to identify the pathways or trajectories along which their transition proceed. But however, the if you take this concept, I mean, if you take this transition metaphor as a complete concept to understand youth transitions, it is actually not 100% correct because the youth transition actually have some limitations. Yeah. So this is some of the limitations. Yep.
Great. That's a great summary. Can you just go back to it for a second?
All right.
Yeah, I don't want to. I don't want to miss this. This is good stuff. So yeah, so whenever we hear about youth, you're going to always hear about this idea of youth as a transitional phase in life, right? So there's this argument that youth is not a specific or an individual identity in and of itself. It is this transitional phase between what? Childhood and adulthood,
Adulthood.
right? So we have children, everybody knows what a child is, right? Or so we think. And we have adults, everybody knows what an adult is, or so we think, right? But what's this youth thing, right? So youth, it doesn't really exist in and of itself. It must be some sort of like, midway point or something in between childhood and adulthood. And so the idea or the metaphor, what they call the metaphor of transition, has played a very big role in how young people are defined, how they're educated, and so forth, right? And so in the actual article on page 58, there's a very good table that the authors provide that gives an idea of how like transition is thought of. Oh, you have it here. Oh, great.
Yep.
Go ahead. So
It's okay.
no, go ahead. You present first and then I'll tambah. Go ahead.
All right. So yeah, just
Nice.
like what Dr. Tiff mentioned, you cannot actually take this concept to fully, to make a concrete concept of what is youth as a transition because it has so many limitations. So some of the metaphor actually said youth transitions is very linear or one way, like for instance, education to employment. But it's in the real life, it is actually multi-directional. So that's why you cannot really use these transitions. What does it mean by multi-directional? It actually involves experience of moving forwards and returns like unemployment, return to learn, and is actually shaped by social difference like class, gender, and race. And wait, I cannot see it. Okay. Okay. Some of another metaphor transition say that a youth transition is very unidimensional, which is in real life it's not. It is very multidimensional. And I also took it from the readings. It said that the labor market transitions intersects with other aspects of life course, such as personal relationship, partnership, setting up home, but this becoming less synchronized. Maybe doctor, you can explain more about this because
Yeah, yeah.
I don't understand what the labor market transitions mean.
Yeah. Go ahead. You finish the slide and I'll I'll comment.
All right.
Finish
Okay.
all of them and then I'll comment. Yeah.
All right, doctor. So another transition method. These transitions is like a finality, a point of arrival, so, but it's actually very multidimensional. It involves it is like a life course as a state of becoming, like changing relationship, changing job, changing residence. It is also problematic and variously. It is maturity socially constructed, and independence never absolute and subject to a range of factors. And when you define youth transitions, you cannot actually fully define it as a chronological and or biological age, because I do believe that in real reality, youth transition is actually culturally constructed. So yeah, it is socially and culturally constructed, and it involves shifting social meanings of age. And the last one is the metaphor of transitions say that youth transition is very structured horizontally. So horizontally means this way, yeah. But in real life, it is actually both ways, horizontal and vertical. So horizontal and vertical dimensions such as age and generations, peers, and others. Okay, that's it. Okay.
Great. So your slide is much prettier, much nicer looking than the table in the book. Anyway, so this is a really important. So the idea of metaphors transition. I mean, Malaysia is a very big transition-based culture in terms of the way we think of youth, because even in terms of education, right? People think that, and I have colleagues actually. I have one colleague who did his PhD, but he never did his bachelor's degree. So think about that for a minute. How do you do a PhD without ever doing a bachelor's degree? So the idea of transition is that, well, the young person goes to primary school and then secondary school, and then they go to university, and then they do their master's, and they do a PhD. And that's the idea of transition, is that there's a very linear process, right? But in reality, there's many young people that the way that they're, and this is just from the perspective of career, this doesn't have to do with the other aspects of their lives, the other dimensions of their lives. And that's what the multidimensional aspect is that labor market transition is not the only way of defining and looking at young people's lives and their development, their identity development. In other words, labor market is very much infused with what happens in their personal relationships at that same time in life. So they may be starting a new job, but at the same time, they're also trying to get married, right? So these two affect each other, right? Like we have many married couples in Malaysia. Maybe some of you are even involved in these long distance relationships where you had to take a job in Johor, but your wife is in Selangor, and so you only see each other on weekends, right? So that kind of relationship is affected. It affects the marriage, the personal relationship affects the work life, and then work life affects the relationship. So these things are not unidimensional, like they happen in vacuums. Like you have your work life and that's on one trajectory, and then your personal life is going another trajectory. No, life is in 3 and 4 dimensional. It's not 2-dimensional. Okay, and so that's what they're talking about here, that things are more complex than the metaphor of transition likes to imply. So my point about the colleague that got his PhD is that he never did a bachelor's degree. So what from a perspective of transition, he would be an outlier. He would be kind of an odd case, because after his, I guess he did a diploma, then he worked for many years, 10 years, I think. Then he went back and did another advanced diploma, right? And then he, because of that, he was able to do a master's degree, and then with master's, he did PhD. And in between, he worked, right? So again, this idea of this very linear educational process, for him, it didn't happen that way. And there's many people like that as well. You know, the way that their careers or their educational careers develop is not linear, right? So the metaphor of transition doesn't really work well. Now, what's happening with COVID-19, this is a very important concept for COVID-19 because it's really completely disrupting a lot of young people's educational and career, their trajectories. In other words, how they're progressing in their education and career, right? With COVID-19, we have many young people that have to stop their education, or they have to take semesters off, they have to work. Even some of them are losing their jobs, so their careers are, you know, taking different directions. You know, you have like airplane pilots that are now unemployed selling kway teow. I mean, it's like total disruption. So in a situation now, like with COVID-19, the idea of transition, the metaphor of transition is really being threatened. And this is what makes a lot of people nervous, is that because of expectations. Oh, by now I should be starting my 3rd semester of university, but because of COVID-19, they can't. So the idea of trajectory is completely, it's shaking their world. It's disrupting their whole idea of where they're supposed to be in life, right? Because we abide by this idea of transition, so it's so fixed in our minds. And maybe some of you are even experiencing this, okay? But in real life, it doesn't happen that way. It doesn't work that way, right? It doesn't work that way. Things happen in life that that do shake things up, right? They don't necessarily happen in such linear ways. And so this is what transition. So that's why transition has become, it's been critiqued quite a bit recently. And now I'm sure with COVID-19, you can see why. Okay, is that clear to everyone? I mean, does everyone see the idea of what transition is about? This idea of transition?
Dr. Prof,
Yeah.
if I may ask, why in the first place we put youth as a part of transition, whereby we cannot just claim that to be, for example, we have childhood and also adults. Those are stages, right? So
Yeah.
I just want to comprehend myself. So why do we put youth as a transition, whereby cannot it just be one of the stages, means childhood, youth, and also adult?
Great question. It's a great question. In fact, next week the article for next week is a little bit about the history of how youth actually came into being. Because the idea of youth and adolescence actually is only about 100 years old. It's a very modern phenomenon, and it came into being or into existence with the creation of secondary school, high school, or in secondary school in Malaysia. Secondary school is only about 100 years old. Before the late 1800s, there really was no such, or really the mid 1800s, there really was no such thing as secondary school. And once they kept young people, children, in school longer, what they did was they extended childhood, right? They extended childhood. And by doing that, this idea of the adolescent or the youth came into being. Before that, most societies, you were a child until you hit the age of more or less puberty, and then you became an adult. That was it. So this idea of youth is really it's really a constructed category. And that's why there's no agreement on what youth is. If you go to the US, they'll say youth is, 11 to 24, and Malaysia is 15 to 30, and Singapore is 15 to 35. Indonesia, I don't know, what is Indonesia? What is it, 15 to 24? Something like that.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
Around that.
Nobody can agree on it because it doesn't really exist outside of how societies define it. It's a socially constructed category.
True.
Yeah. So again, going back 200 years to Malaysia, once you hit, for girls, it was earlier, once boys and girls became adults in terms of biology, in terms of puberty, they were adults. They were married. People were having families and married and having families at 15 years old. Nowadays we say, oh my God, it's pedophilia and it's all these things. But back then, that was the norm. That was the norm.
Yeah.
That was normal society. There was no youth. right? When you turn, especially as a male, if you turn 15, you became an apprentice. You started working, right? You started your professional life, whatever that was. And that's why they were having families at that age, you know. And in those days, 10 and 11-year-olds were taking on the tasks that adults take on now. You know, the level of maturity was just so much higher. Totally, so society is totally different now. So they've extended childhood through the advent of schooling, really. Schooling is what made really created youth. But we'll get into that next week when we talk about the history a little bit. Okay, so great question, Mahfouz. All right, Mutiara, please continue because I'm keeping us delaying our progress here. Go ahead.
Right. All right. So youth as transition. Another way to define transitions is actually kind of similar as liminal state
Uh-oh.
as
Here.
well as transitional state. So liminal stage means between. It's actually a space that is socially and symbolically marked by space and time. So this is actually explaining the concept of liminality by anthropologists. Fictive marked by ritual is actually another way to understand this is actually the same with.
Okay, so you're talking about liminal stage. Yeah, liminality.
Yep. So what are the changes? What is involved in rites of passage, liminality, and so forth? They actually involve change of status, marriage or engagement, change of place, perhaps new address, change of positions, a new job, or maybe change across time. Yeah. Other example of range of social and cultural status change could be birth, childhood, puberty, betrothal, marriage, pregnancy, and so on. So rites of passage is actually an event in your life that march in your life. So you feel like, oh yeah, I'm an adult now. To my experience, my rites of passage is actually my graduations in bachelor. So when I experience when I graduated, I feel like, oh yeah, I somehow become an adult, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. To get a better understanding, I actually added some memes regarding rites of passage here on the right side. What was the defining moment you become adult? Could be rite of passage, parents trusting you with something otherwise dangerous, or just a sudden dose of reality, which is really true. Yeah, so you can just read all of the memes here to get a better understanding of rites of passage.
Yeah, so liminality is a big concept in Bradford's work. He talks a lot about liminality being at the margins. Youth at the margins. Then again, it's that stage of being in between. Where they're in some ways they're very much like children, in other ways they're very much like adults, but they're neither here nor there, right? And like I have a teenage son right now that it's literally like moment to moment. You can sit down and have a conversation with him like he's an adult one minute, but the next minute he's doing something that reminds you that he's still in that sort of childhood on that cusp between becoming a child or being a child and becoming an adult. So it's this idea of in-betweenness, and those rituals, like we mentioned before, marriage, graduating high school, getting a driver's license, all these rituals that determine when you sort of enter the fold of adulthood, right? But what's really funny is that, like, okay, so for example, in Malaysia, what age do you have to be to join the military? Anybody know? Any Malaysians? Can you tell me what age do you have to be to join the military? Anybody know?
Military as if to as
Askar.
a job or a job sebagai kerja dia.
Yeah.
I think after SPM.
SPM. So what? 17.
After SPM.
18.
18. I'm not sure.
Up until a couple years ago or last year, whenever they did it, I don't remember. to vote. You could not vote till you're 21. Betul. So how is it that you can join the military and go fight and die for your country, but you can't vote?
Oh, good point.
This is the idea of liminality, right? You're sort of at the boundaries of adulthood, but but ironically, it's in a lot of ways it's very inconsistent. We don't really know. We don't really have a fixed idea of when a young person becomes an adult, right? You can go and literally give your life for your country, but you cannot vote to choose your leader. Maybe now you can. Of course, they've changed it to 18, but it's that sort of idea. In other countries, like in Western countries, like in the U.S., where I'm from, you can also at 18 join the military and fight and die for your country, but you cannot. If you do drink alcohol, you can't drink alcohol till you're 21, right? So it's this idea of these sort of symbolic markers they call rituals. These are sort of rituals that determine when a young person becomes an adult. But like Mutiara mentioned, they're socially and culturally constructed very much, as we can see, right? There's nothing that says a young person has to vote at 18 biologically. It's all determined by society, right? So even the idea of marriage, there's a lot of debate in Malaysia about childhood marriage. Okay, there's a huge outcry against childhood marriage because they see young people getting married at 16, and there's a huge outcry. No, I'm not advocating for young people to get married at 16, but my point is that is also very much socially constructed, because 100 years ago, 16 would have been a perfect age for marriage, right?
True.
So again, this very much has to do with societal and cultural norms, but it really does show how youth is sort of this no man's land, right? And
Yeah.
even adults are debating whether young people should be able to do this and do that and so forth, get married and vote and all these things. So that young people really have very little power as young people, as youth, right? Because they're in this liminality stage where no one really knows what they are and what to do with them.
Yep.
Okay.
True.
So keep going with your next slide is important. This is an important slide too. And
Okay.
after this slide, we'll take our break.
All right, Doctor. So according to Victor Turner, there are three process of becoming adult. First, adolescence, which means separations. And then the second one is actually in the middle. One is youth at the liminality at the margin, which already explained by Dr. Latif, and also adulthood reincorporations. Yeah. So what I could explain youth as liminality is actually at the margin, which is really true. It is a threshold in which the youth pass before reincorporated in their new cultural and social status. And I also found a new term, which is kaninkular, being in the tunnel. I actually tried to Google it, but I didn't. The Google even didn't give me answer to that. So maybe you can explain it later.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah, and then the youth, the liminality, is like also signifies the great importance of real or symbolic threshold. So as Dr. Latif mentioned before, the youth is neither one thing nor the other, no person's land. Yeah, betwixt and between.
Right.
Yep.
So adolescence, they say here, he labels adolescence as separation, and the idea there is that in adolescence, the teenager begins to separate from the family in terms of they begin the process of individualization or individuation, they call it, where you start to become an individual. You begin to see yourself separate from your family. Okay, that's this process of adolescence, the teenager. That's why the teenager is seen as rebellious, and they want to be in their room 8 hours a day by themselves, but they still want to be in the house. They just don't want to be, interacting with their parents too much. But they still want to be in the house, but on their own. So they're trying to separate, but they don't want to completely separate. Again, it's this idea of being at the margins, youth, child, but not really a child, an adult, not really an adult. They're sort of in between. And so they go through the stage of liminality where there's, you know, they're sort of here and there and so forth. Sometimes they're treated like children, sometimes they're treated like adults, until finally they're reincorporated into adult society at some point. And that point may not be the same for everyone. It may not be at 30, even though the Malaysian youth policy says at 30 you become an adult. But that was also very, I mean, the 30-year-old age, if you look at the rationale for it in the policy itself, it's a very arbitrary age. Why 30? The rationale given was, well, we want to be on par with other countries. Well, that's not very, you know, I mean, in terms of a reason to define young people at 30 as adults, you know, there's nothing really scientific about that, just because you want to be on par with other countries. I think actually there's a stronger argument for 40, but you know, it's not very popular these days because that's kind of considered quite kind of old for youth. But so, you know, and then finally you're reincorporated and you become a full adult into society. All right. So this idea of transition, adolescence, and then youth, and then adulthood. All right. Okay. So wait, there's a couple comments. I just want to get to the comments. Nana said there's a social opinion on becoming an ideal youth. It creates a burden because young people are still exploring their identity. Yes, it does. And it creates a lot of stress and pressure on young people. Even I know as a parent, I catch myself doing the same thing with my own kids. You know, this idea of, you know, not really recognizing this, that they are in this stage and it's actually rather normal for them to be in that stage. And we have this expectation for them to be perfect, even at such a young age, you know. But it's really an age where they're going to make a lot of mistakes, and they should, because again, they're trying to figure out who they are. It's that identity exploration age. And then Roshakina said, in Malaysia, we have an APPLE program where APPLE is accreditation of prior experience-based learning. It's defined as a systematic process involving the identification, documentation, and evaluation of learning based on prior experience. Can you just explain that a little bit, Roshakina? What was that in reference to there?
Okay, Prof, just now you just mentioned about your friend have a PhD. Just a moment.
Tapa, it's okay. Work from home. We're all working from home. Don't worry about it. It's okay. Kids are welcome. Kids are welcome.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Okay, just now you just mentioned about your colleague have a PhD, without a bachelor degree. So in Malaysia, we have the APPLE program, whereby if we don't have a degree or diplomas, but we can continue our study to the high level based on the APPLE program. This is the collaboration with the MQA.
Okay. It's relatively new though. Is that relatively new, APPLE?
Oh no, it's not new.
It's been around for a long time.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I've heard of it before. I don't know if my friend went through that, but yes, I've heard of that before. So yeah, so this is a good development. This is a good development because it recognizes this idea that transition is not always linear, especially when it comes to education and career. Yeah. In fact, I don't know if a lot of people know about it, to be honest with you, APPLE. But it's definitely a good initiative. Okay, so let's Mutiara, we'll stop there for our break. Okay, our class break. So we'll put you on hold for a few minutes. All right. Okay, so we're going to take a break now. About if everyone could try to be back around 20 minutes or so. All right, we'll try and get back to work then. All right. Okay. Cool. Okay. All right. So we'll see you back. I will pause the recording. Let me tell you a funny story about this class break. So last semester, I was also teaching a 6 to 9 class, right? And I would have my break around this time in the class. And there was a couple of weeks where there was one man in the class, individual. During the class break, he would get up from his seat and go wherever, to the kitchen or whatever. It turns out he wasn't wearing his clothes from the waist down. And the other students only saw it because of the recording. They saw it on the recording. So I had to delete that part of the video out. So I'm going to pause the recording, okay? So just to make sure everyone's dressed properly, okay? And then when we come back, I'll start it again. Okay.
Oh wow.
Yeah, it's one of those things, right? You know, it's a new reality, new normal.
Yeah, really new normal.
So just make sure you're wearing your, you're fully clothed when you go to your online classes. Okay, inshallah, I'll see you in a few minutes. Recording again. Okay. If you see in the chat, our chat box, I forgot to add the link for the attendance today in Putra Blast, so I've done it now. So whenever you get a chance, just go ahead and sign in using the attendance link in Putra Blast. Please don't forget, okay? Okay, Mutiara, are you ready to continue? So let's try and finish up the presentation by 8:30. I will try to reduce my interruptions, so to let you finish, you and Amira. And we'll try and finish up by 8:30 because at 8:30, I'd like to do some reflection exercise on the reading. So go ahead. I will try to reduce my interjections.
All right, Doctor. So, hi everyone, welcome back. So, okay, just let me continue on a discussion of youth as a transition. So, to my understanding, youth as a transition is actually like a murky water because it's actually marked by ambiguity and uncertainty. So, youth during this process or during this period, they don't actually know what will happen, or they don't actually they are unsure of what will happen next. So, and then the youth transition is often associated with danger and pollution. The stranger is perhaps the iconic identity here, in which it leads to an anomalous. So this sentence is trying to say that um, during this process of transitioning of becoming an adult, a youth actually experiencing or will be experiencing things that they don't know, or I could say as stranger things that they never encountered before. So that's why it relates to like danger and pollution and the stranger thingy. Yeah, it is actually a space in which social taboos are broken, most of which will again be tabooed once the stage of liminality is over. So as I think Dr. Latif mentioned it before, during this process, youth is actually finding their own identity. So they're kind of they don't know what is right and wrong. So that's why sometimes they did something that is wrong in that time, but it's actually in adulthood is very wrong. So that explains the social taboos that are broken at that time. It is actually society's natural crucible for social experiment. So it involves so many experiments of life. But however, besides all the downsides of youth as transitions, the liminality isn't bad actually, because there is the potential for much pleasure in liminal space, as it is necessarily open to creative appropriations. All cultures must take account of and deal with the anomalies that are inevitable produced as a consequence of their classificatory norms and practice. Oh wow, that is very mouthful. Okay.
So
okay, next is
go ahead.
Yeah.
No, I just wanted to comment on the stranger metaphor.
Okay.
Because what's funny about this age, about the age of youth, is that when adults criticize young people, it's often quite funny because in many cases when adults criticize young people, they themselves did a lot of the things that they criticized when they were youth, right? And we see this, every generation sort of goes through this, right? Adults criticize young people for being rebellious or for violating social taboos or whatever they do, and then in fact if they look back at their own lives when they were young people, they did a lot of those same things. Your comment, Mutiara, about at this age young people not really knowing what's right and wrong, that's a very interesting comment, because what we also know is from understanding young people's lives, especially in adolescence, is that it's often an age where young people, like here they say, test the waters. It's not necessarily that they don't know what's right from wrong, but they're inheriting for example, what they've learned in school or what they've learned from parents about what's right and wrong, but they haven't experienced it for themselves. So it's an age, that's why the young people tend to be very rebellious, is that we perceive them as rebellious, but in actuality, they're actually just, it's their way of learning. It's their way of testing the water, so to speak, to see whether these truths that they've inherited from us, adults, from society and so forth, actually are true. It's their way of gaining that critical experiential learning. So they're really, in a lot of ways, they're testing our authenticity, right? You know, we say don't do this, don't do that, it's wrong. They want to know for themselves, right? Because they're beginning to get an identity for themselves. They're starting to figure out who they are as people, and they want to know, you know, firsthand experience whether these things are actually true. So that's why adults have to be very, when we work with young people, we have to be very honest. We have to be very straightforward. We cannot, you know, this idea that, like with children, you can say things like, well, do it because I told you to do it. I'm your parent and you should just obey me. That works with children, but a lot of times with young people, it doesn't work because that's not enough for them. They wanna know truth firsthand. They want to know it experientially, right? So it's not enough for them. It doesn't satisfy them. They have to experience it for themselves, right? So it's an age where they're really seeking a lot of authenticity. And like in Islam, we say that their hearts are still very pure in that sense. And they are. They're very, that's why a lot of social movements are led by young people, because they have that idealism. They have that sense of right and wrong. It's very clear to them. And they often call out adult hypocrisy, right? Because of these things. That's why, look at now, young people are getting so fed up with politics and politicians, because they're seeing through a lot of the lies and the dishonesty and all the things that politicians do. They see through it. Sorry, was there something?
So it's actually like finding the truth, right? Yeah.
Young people historically, they've always been the ones that have been leading those kinds of things, those kind of societal reform movements aimed at, you know, fighting corruption, for example, you know, trying to create a more honest and upright society. It's always been led by young people. You know, if you look back historically, youth, you know, these social movements have always been led by young people. So this is part of identity development, you know. You know, there's a joke, like in the US, like the 1960s, there was all these protests about social justice and everything when they were young people. And then when they became adults, they became the head of the corporations that were doing all the bad things.
Yeah, true.
You know? So it's like, yeah. So liminality is not necessarily a bad thing. I like that you say that liminality isn't necessarily bad. It just is. It's just a state of, it's a state of life. It's a state of being.
Okay, I get your point of that. Thank you.
I'll shut up now. Go ahead.
Okay. So sociology and youth transitions. I'm just going to read all this. Okay.
Go ahead.
The growth of sociological interest in youth transitions reflects the condition of late modernity, in which traditional routes into adulthood have become increasingly fragmented, protracted, or prolonged, and non-linear. So Valenti 2003 argues that youth transitions are socially constructed around a normative framework, or it can be stated as a linear movement from dependence to independence, intersected by issues such as gender, class, and sexuality. However, various individualization theories suggest a tendency away from such structurally determined transitions towards individualized and apparently proliferating or developing choices in the late modernity. Okay, so Berg 1992 refers to the three elements of this movement towards individualizations. The first thing is disembedding. So for some young people, the sense of boundary between youth and adulthood is no longer clear, and young people engage in conduct previously identified as adult. And the second one is loss of security. So young people might access other adults' interests and responsibility earlier or later. So I think this explains what Dr. Latif has mentioned it before. I still remember some part that you mentioned this. And the last part is re-embedding. So this explains new norms of social relationship and commitments are formed, and which kind of provide a sense of reintegrations through which young construct a sense of identity, such as friendship, partnership, interest group, and so on. Okay.
So that's really important, actually. Let me just, so in Malaysia, a lot of people feel that, like, for example, Malaysia is becoming too westernized, and they always point to this trend towards individualization. Do anyone agree with that? Anybody want to comment on that? Because this is really what they're talking about here.
I'm not Malaysian, but I agree.
You're Indonesian, so it's okay. Close enough. Indonesians feel the same way, is my question, I guess.
Yeah, true. Yeah, we do feel the same way.
Okay. And so what does individualization mean to you guys when you say that? When you see that, what do you think of?
It is basically what is it called? Like not a lifestyle. It's like we are given rights to do whatever we want to. So that's why it's called individualization. Yeah.
Okay.
And I think that's all. That's the general thing.
Okay. Anyone from Malaysia want to comment? We hear this all the time, right? This idea that the westernization has led to this excess individualization.
So it's from the Western countries.
Right. So it's a Western cultural kind of movement. So here they give three elements of this idea of individualization, especially in terms of youth. And so Beck talks about disembedding, right? So individuals are liberated from their customary ties of family, locality, and tradition. And I think that's what a lot of people, that's what they see, right? This idea that traditions are changing, the customary ways of doing things are no longer there. There's less close ties to family and traditional ways of doing things, and now everyone is doing things their own way, and right. So there's this what they call disembedding, where young people are just not following in what their parents and their grandparents and so forth did, right? So it's a new way of doing things. So that's, I think, causing a lot of anxiety among a lot of people. And then the loss of security. Okay, so and in the article, Bradford talks about how this has a lot to do with the idea that religion and traditional belief systems fail to offer appropriate guidance to young people. So young people become disenchanted, right? So there's this loss of meaning in life that these traditional belief systems and religion provide, right? So this is one of the dangerous movements and trends where we see young people who are faced with so many challenges, but at the same time they've lost a lot of their traditional sort of religious and spiritual support, right? And it creates a lot of internal turmoil and stress and so forth, anxiety and so forth. So there's that security, that sense of security is no longer there like it used to be. And then this sort of re-embedding, what they call re-embedding, all right? So there's new forms of social relationships, right? So young people becoming reintegrated into society as adults, but in different ways than in the past. So it's no longer like get married and have family. Now you see, single people who are, career oriented, but they're living with their friends for, into their 40s and their 50s. And so you have these new sort of formulations of social relationships and so forth, right? You have all these different interest groups now of different types, which sort of replace family in a lot of ways, right? So young people are re-embedding into society, but in different ways than in the past, right? And this is what Beck refers to as individualization. And so Beck was writing this in the early 90s, yeah? And of course he's a Westerner and he's talking about it from the Western perspective. So now we fast forward 30 years later and you can see the same things happening here in this part of the world, right? In fact, when I moved to Malaysia in around 2000, what was really interesting to me is that I saw a lot of the trends that happened in the West, they were happening in Malaysia, but like 20 years delayed. So it's taken like 20 years or so for the same trends to begin to come here. So I think there is a time issue. It takes time, right, for these things to happen. But we see this very clearly. I know several people in UPM, colleagues, who are, there's this thing now where like there's a lot of professional adults in Malaysia that just choose not to marry. They choose to stay single, right? Which, 30, 40 years ago would be unheard of for most people, right? To not, they could get married. They've had offers. There's people that want to marry them, but they just choose to be individuals. They choose to be single and so forth. So this is just kind of a new trend that we see in society. And of course, this has been going on in the West for many years, right? So it is an individualization of the culture. So, and it has a lot to do with what happens in the youth. Okay, so please continue. Sorry, again, I'm interjecting too long.
No, thank you, Dr. Latif. You clear out my confusions, actually.
Okay, yeah.
Thank you. Okay, in summary, for my part, although young people are given choices towards individualization, this focus should not be taken to mean that the social is no longer important in shaping young people's view of education and their futures. The work of Bradford and Hay 2007 shows that how it is possible to misunderstand the effect of individualization as a process in which the social somehow becomes expelled from everyday life, which I really agree.
Yeah, we are social creatures, and the social will always be important. It's just how it shapes us is going to change. It's changing. That's all.
True. Okay, so I will hand it over to Amira. So yeah, the time is yours, Amira.
Okay, Amira, what do you got for us?
Assalamualaikum. Hi.
Hello. Hi.
Okay, I will continue private and public roles. The identity formation and construction of young people is closely related to three major institutional factors such as family, community, and friendship.
Okay, all right. So this is what I was referring to in the beginning of the class, all right? We talk about social factors shaping identity. So now they're gonna get into the social factors. So go ahead, yeah.
Okay, first of all, we look at family. What is the meaning of family? It can be understood as economic, educational, and cultural institution. According to Corral, family memory and memories have real power in creating the setting in which people define who they are and where they come from. However, it is difficult to give a precise definition to term family, as the meaning of family is shaped by belief, practice, and historically specific. Different family practice, form, and structure has emerged, and different young people develop different expectations and identities in context of their families. Family also seem to be constituted within shifting boundaries, and the structure of families appear to be changing. There are three obvious shifts that may be very important in the life of young people and have significance for them to construct meanings around identity and family. Number one is cohabitation families and with non-married partners. This shift in social values as a whole. The second one is families reconstitute through divorce and repartnering. Young people who growing up in lone parent family are more likely than others to experience poverty and other form of social exclusion. Number three is families with same-sex partners. This one, Prof, I don't find any further explanation. If you can explain more.
Okay, so again, he's writing from the UK perspective, okay? So that's important to keep in mind. Basically what he's saying here though is he's not as the author, he's not endorsing any particular family arrangement. What he's saying is that across the world, if you look across the world in different cultures, and it's a fact that in the West especially, you do have these types of families now. But the very notion of family is changing. And if in Malaysia, we can even point to the fact that, for example, in Malaysia, we have very high divorce, much higher divorce rates now than we used to have, right? So you have a lot more single parent families in Malaysia than you did, you know, even 20, 30 years ago. So what, for young people growing up in those types of families, right? What is life like? How does that shape their identity? And it does. It has a very big impact. When I was growing up in the U.S., of course, divorce rates have always been, well, they've been high in the U.S. since I think around the 1970s. They've been quite high. And I had several friends growing up. My parents, alhamdulillah, were not divorced, but I had friends who came from divorced single-parent families. And you could see how difficult it was for them in many ways, having parents of divorced. And maybe some of you grew up in families like that as well. So how that affects young people's, again, their identity development, it's a very powerful influence. And so all he's saying here is that if you look across different cultures in different countries and so forth, how family is defined now is drastically changing, right? And that's just a fact. I mean, doesn't mean you endorse any particular type of family. You know, Malaysia still has a very traditional, more or less traditional family structure, I think, even though, again, I think it's changing, right? But you cannot deny the fact that these different types of families exist, and these different types of families will affect how a young person develops and how their identity develops. Okay, so that's really all he's trying to show here. Any comments, questions from anyone?
So I have questions actually.
Okay.
One question. What is the relation between the meaning of family and our identity? Like, you explained that some of the families are not the same as it was the notion. So what does it affect, you know, the meaning of family, let's say? I mean, is it the meaning of the family really affects identity, youth identity, if you know what I mean?
Yeah, well, let's think of it this way. So for example, say you're a young man, you're a young person, a young man, and you are the oldest of 5 kids, right? And you know, you're 18 years old and your father no longer lives in your house. So as a young person growing up in that house, you are the man of the house. That is a very different identity. That is a very different identity experience, because your identity development is very different than if you have a father living in your house with you, where you're not the man of the house. There's a father who's the man of the house, right? So that's just one very simple example. Family, definitely, the constitution of the family definitely affects your identity development. Even the personality of the parents and how the parents interact with the children affects a young person's identity development, you know? So we know for a fact, like overbearing mothers, for example, mothers who are really overbearing with their kids, they spoil them rotten. That affects your identity, how you, you know, your sense of self in your identity development, right? How you see yourself. So yeah. And so you think of all the different combinations of family nowadays that you can get. You know, even if you've lost a parent, maybe a parent has passed away, you know, and you're living with a single parent, or maybe you're not living with parents, maybe you're living with grandparents. A lot of young people nowadays, they're raised by their grandparents, not even their parents. So that's definitely going to have an effect on your sense of who you are, no question. Because the dynamic with grandparents is very different than the dynamic with parents, right? And so we know, like a lot of Chinese families, that's common, right? Where the grandparents raise, especially when the kids are young, they raise the children while the parents are working. But even in Malay families, we see it. I have neighbors who are grandparents who are raising their grandkids, more or less, you know? So, I mean, it happens in a lot of cultures, right? So it's definitely going to have an impact on identity development.
Got it. Thank you, Doctor.
Yeah.
Okay, Amira.
Yeah, Amira.
Amira, you forget to unmute your microphone.
Yeah, sorry. New normal.
Yeah.
Okay, shifting family dynamics also have created new setting which children and young people grow up. Family life has become increasingly democratized, and family have departed from a model in which men dominate. parenting style also accommodate negotiation and consensus rather than enforcement and of conformity.
Okay, so, and this has a lot to do with, for example, more women in the workforce, right, working now. So 2 breadwinners at home, right? So both parents are working and earning incomes. In some cases, you even have the women are the main breadwinners and the men are house husbands in some cases. You know, so you have this type of family now, right? So even the family dynamics are changing quite a bit. And they call it democratization of the family. That's just what they call it. It's funny, like this one scholar pointed out, he said, in some cultures still to this day, in some cultures, for example, if you ask, in some cultures, they don't ask the children what they want for dinner. You know, like, Sayang, what do you want to eat for dinner tonight? You know, you want ayam or you want daging or whatever. They just, the mother just prepares the meal. And if the kids want to eat, they eat. If they don't eat, they don't eat. But in a lot of families now, you have this democratization even of the food and the meals. So we ask the kids what they want to eat for dinner. So traditionally, this was never done, right? So this is also a modern phenomenon, right? And so children learn about decision making at an earlier age nowadays because they actually have a lot more voice in the family than they used to. And again, it's not to say one is better than the other. It's just to describe the dynamic and the fact that these dynamics do affect young people's again their development. So democratization of the family is definitely real. And this is also, I think, something that one could argue is also influenced by Western culture in the sense that I think Western countries, women were out in the workforce probably at a greater rate earlier than women in non-Western cultures, although that could be argued, I guess, as well. But so I think that's also played a role.
Doctor, if I may add,
Yep.
about this one is depends on economy of the family also.
Yep.
If the economy is very good, then you can choose lah whatever you want. But
True.
if you have only limited source, then eat whatever parents
Yes.
sediakan lah.
Absolutely. And this has to do with he talks about it in terms of social class, you know, so social class also affects identity. So, you know, economic realities of the family also play a role. Absolutely, without question. Like here, we're talking about family. We haven't talked really about class yet or socioeconomic status and all that. Those are also important factors that play a role in identity development. Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for adding that.
Thank you, Prof.
Yeah.
Now we look at community.
Okay.
According to Day 2006, people who belong to different kind of communities consistent with a complex and perhaps fragmented social world with which they engage at different points of their life, resulting in multiple identification and loyalties. There are also globalization community. Globalization has increased in the possibility of faith communities appearing in new location and setting and become influential in providing ties and affiliation that shape young people's life. Whereas religious affiliation, it is a core dimension of personhood, an important source of value, life purpose, and communal belonging, and a vehicle for making transition from adolescent to adulthood.
Yeah. Okay. So now community. So first family, and now talking about community. So in the article, he talks, in addition to what you just presented, Amira, he talks about the role of weakening social ties and the need for community to make up for those. And so nowadays we have very different types of communities. You know, it's not so much anymore just the geographic community, like your neighborhood, for example, or your, you know, where you live. Now we have so many different types of community. We have online communities. We have, you know, communities based on different leisure activities, special interests that we're involved in. So there's just this huge explosion of different types of community affiliations now, right? And we even have, like he says, globalization of community. We even have communities comprised of people from different countries. You know what I mean? So in a lot of ways, community is really playing a big role in young people's identity development. Religious affiliation, of course, there has been a weakening, especially in the West, Western countries. There's been a weakening of religious affiliation, and I think that's one of the reasons why other types of communities have really become more popular, because of the fact that traditionally people's religious communities were a major source of support, and a support of, like he says, providing life purpose, values, and all that. Since that's not as influential as it used to be, other types of communities have taken up the slack, right? And so different types of social relations, yeah. All right. Okay, next. Unless anybody has anything they want to add.
Now we look at dimension of community, like Prof said just now. First dimension is common space or place, being somewhere, like a physical place like village, virtual place like Facebook, common interest, goal and activities. The example is social position, poverty, sense of common disadvantage, advantage, perspective. Number 3 is collective action, such as working together for a common good. Example, politician agitation, repairing a historic building, or simply doing similar things together. Number 4 is shared story, collective memory and identity, a sense of we. Identity construct over time, present of effective bond, self-defined as belonging to the community.
Okay. So different types of community, actually. These are all the different dimensions, different types of community. There's all these different types of community out there now, right? So we may even be part of communities we're not even aware of, because they just are. So we share certain experiences with a certain group of people. Like we're a part of a minority group, for example. You know, that's actually can be a form of community, a dimension of community, okay? And so there's all these different types of community now that people, I think, they draw support, and they also, in terms of young people, they play a role in young people's identity development of who they are.
Doctor, I have one question actually. I'm sorry if I keep asking.
No, this is exactly what I want. Please go ahead.
You mentioned about the weakening of social, right? And that's what makes the community take place to kind of replace it. What do you mean by weakening social? Is there any events to indicate the weakening social thingy?
Well, weakening social ties is what they refer to. And
yeah, that one.
Yeah, like I think they're one. I think it starts with well, it starts with the family. So of course, the loss of extended family, for example, especially in the Eastern cultures, you know. So you used to have, it was quite common for, you know, people growing up in, you know, villages, small villages, and so forth, having multiple generations living together, right? That's much less common now, even in Eastern cultures, right? And then you don't have those sort of small town or village types of social bonds that we used to have. You know, I mean, even probably you guys, probably many of you even remember growing up in, you know, a small town or kampong, or where, you know, your neighbors saw you as their own children. You know, they treated you like their own children. That kind of a communal bond. Those really strong social ties. Now we have the more urban lifestyle where people are sort of sitting in their homes, you know, looking at Astro or looking at their handphones and not really interacting very much. So there is definitely a weakening of social ties, I think, generally speaking, you know. But again, what they're saying here is that, but that in some ways has been replaced by other types of community, right? So the nature of social ties has changed. But there are very strong arguments from scholars. Like there's a very famous book called Bowling Alone by he's a social he's a scholar of I don't know if he's a sociologist, but he's Robert Putnam. He does a lot of work on social capital. He talks about how a lot of those social bonds that used to exist, like just through, you know, bowling clubs, for example, like in the West, you know, those things, they don't exist to the extent that they used to exist, you know. So these kind of so this idea that social ties are eroding is really what they're getting at. But like he says here, there's new forms of community. So it's really hard to measure or to gauge for sure. But these are observations that scholars make. So, and you may agree, you may disagree. You know, it's really it's not to say that one is definitely true or not.
Yeah, I get what you mean. Okay. Thank you, Doctor.
Yeah.
Okay, now we look at a form of new community, like Prof said just now. Number one is networking community. Radiates from individuals, often connect through new technologies, compressed place, low solidarity. People that you know, connection and mates of big. Second is lifestyle community. The characteristic is shared culture code and values, having similar tastes. For example, leisure identities of different kind, fashion and music. The third one is tribal community. Affiliation based on effective ties, feeling as much as interest, warmth and companionship. Example, sport fans, music fans, fashion followers.
Yeah.
They have another form of new community. Number 4 is social movement. The characteristic is centered on political mobilization, loosely structured and network, express identity and values through affiliation. The example is anti-capitalist, eco-warriors, and again, gay community. Number 5 is virtual community. The characteristic is interaction can be formed anywhere, limitless online identities. Example, Facebook, online gamers, and Instagram.
Yeah, those are some really interesting ones. I mean, I think you're seeing a lot of everywhere in all countries. I'm just looking at the social movements as a community. It seems to be incredibly strong now, especially like environmental groups and a lot of political-based groups now, which are actually social movements of sort, but they've become communities really with their own languages and their own, their own symbols and the messages that they try to get across, the issues that they rally around as a community. You're seeing this everywhere. It's really strong in the West, and I think it's even in Malaysia as well. So social movements now are becoming really big communities. I have a colleague who he's a member of, looking at the number 3, the tribal communities, the sports fans and all that. Like he's a member of the Chelsea football fan club in Malaysia. But he was telling me about it and how it operates and how it sort of functions. And it's a community. I mean, they don't just go and like watch football games together, but they go and they do like charity work together, and they have meetings, and like it's a really it's an organization, and can even be described definitely as a community, even though they're just a fan club of Chelsea football club or whatever, So so of course these kind of communities didn't exist in the past, right? So again, talking about how community has evolved, right? These are new types of communities. But what it says is that we are social creatures, and the social dimension of life is not going to go away, even though we become more individualized. But we still have that need for community. We'll always have that need for social, for being social, right? And all these things, of course, do affect young people's identity development and how they develop. Okay, so good. All right. Next, Amir.
Okay, now like we look at friendship. Young people's network of relationship. There are 6 relationship that the article said. Number 1 is professional, community, family members, partner, peers, and friendship. Friends. There's different relationship provide the setting in which young people construct their personal and social identities. These relationships are important in various ways and at different times, but they provide social recognition and affirmation to young people. This relationship also shape young people's conduct, permitting them to adopt different positions and roles at various times and gain feedback through the relationship they have with others. Friendship is a kind of social barometer. Each area constructs friendship in its own term, shaped by prevailing economic, social, and cultural factors. Friendship is something that is chosen and has value in and of itself. One way of understanding the nature of relationship identified here in terms of level and type of intimacy that define them. There are 3 dimensions. First is intimacy, physical or embodied, sexual, physical caring or nurturing. Intimacy, emotional, sharing of feeling, anxieties or passions, recognition of others' emotional. Intimacy of knowledge, shared between people, and that is denied to those outside the relationship of intimacy or the circle of intimate. Then is peer relationship, that is referring to similar age, status or position, may be very influential to young people because it is kind of relationship they assume potentially common interests and concern. They also take care of each other and took out for each other interests in some way. According to Rob 2007, suggests intimate relationship are one domain in which young people can express aspect of adult identity. Relationship with a partner have been seen as principal component of young people's transition to adult.
Okay. Go ahead. Sorry, I'll let you keep going.
Giddens 2000 said that globalization introduced an almost unlimited diversity of lifestyle choice that become the core of identity. Process of detraditionalization, decline of tradition have shaped personal relationship. Friendship and intimacy generally are things to be worked on, chosen, and cultivate as part of a developing project of the self. The last one is the influence of expert system and feminism has encouraged new dimension of emotional well-being. As conclusion, the decline and fragmentation of life society in which relationship of family, community, and friendship were interwoven and assume importance as clear signifiers of future identity. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Okay, so you summed it up pretty quickly. Okay.
Yep.
All right. I was going to ask you to stop there anyway because there's a few more pages in the article that I think you guys sort of skipped. But that's okay. you can go back and look at them on your own. Like he talks about social capital, right? And then goes into Gideon's work a bit more. So, but it's okay because the timing is good. All right. So, are there any questions about that? What I'd like to do now is I want to experiment because I've actually never done this before on using Zoom. But Zoom, we have this feature for doing breakout rooms. Yeah. So let me just show you what we're gonna do. So if let me just share my screen here. Okay, so on Pucha Blast, oh, this is not Pucha Blast, this is Padlet. On Pucha Blast, can you see Pucha Blast now?
Yep.
Okay, so I want to do this reflection exercise, and I'm gonna try and break you into small groups of 3 using Zoom. You can have Zoom small groups, okay? They're called breakout rooms, okay? And what I want you to do is I want you to go to Padlet, and if you click on the link here, it'll take you to this page, okay? So what I've done is I've posted 5 questions based on the reading this week. And what I want you to do is I want, in your small groups, I want you to each choose 1 question to try and answer now before we say bye-bye for the evening, okay? So in your small group, try to answer the question and provide the answer here on the Padlet. All right, so you don't have to do all 5, just choose 1 of these questions to do in the small group and then report it on the Padlet here. Okay, so what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna try and break you into groups. Is that clear, by the way? Is that clear what the assignment is?
Yes, clear.
All right, so let's try and do this. Hold on here. So I'm gonna stop sharing first. All right, breakout rooms. So there's 25 of us online. Well, 25 of you. So I'm going to break you into 8 rooms. Okay. So when I do this, it's automatically going to put you in a room with three or 4 people. Okay. Most of you 3, and 1 room will have 4. Okay. So if it works, go ahead and try to answer the question. Come up with it. What you can do is you can go through the article together and then discuss it together, and then one of you can write the answer on the Padlet for the group. All right. So let's see if I can do it. I'm going to try and do it now. All right. Not started. Okay. So it's done it automatically. It's put you into these groups now. Okay. Okay. That's fine.
Doctor, can you share the Padlet links? Because I'm trying to open the Push-Up Blast, but it's lagging.
Yes, I can. Hold on 1 sec. I'll put it here in the chat box.
All right, thank you.
Okay, so let's see if it works. Did it work? Okay, bye. Hmm.
also you and me. So we come back to the group.
No, I try to search.
Okay, you're back.
One of our members already left. I thought she's already joining this class.
Oh, she left the class.
I'm not sure whether she left because or she joined this group. But then we try to find specific answer for the questions. Or should we go back to our breakout group?
How about you can do it from here? You can just go on Padlet from here, no problem. Yeah, I just wanted you to have some discussion about it. It's okay. In fact, I was going to tell everybody through message, I was going to let them know that they can come back into the main room when they're done. Oh, so Shirley went back into the room.
Oh yeah, okay, I go back there.
She's waiting for you, I think.
Wait, which one? Okay.
That's hilarious.
Dr. Latif?
Yes.
I disconnected just now.
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
my internet was like in a problem just now. So how can I join the group just now?
Let me see here.
I was in the group 2, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, okay, good. Hold on.
Yeah.
Mira.
Yeah.
Group 2. Okay, I'm sending you back. He's still in class, man.
Đây lại có đây là mình thể chứng tỏ.
Semua lupa mute.
It's okay, I can mute everybody. Okay, so they'll be all coming back in now, actually. They'll all be coming back in. The rooms are closed. Okay, that was pretty fun, actually. I was able to like send you to rooms and take you out of rooms, and I felt so powerful. Okay, so I was looking at your answers, so I think you did a good job. Let me share the screen here. I won't go through them all, don't worry. I won't look at all of them individually. But okay, so you hit on some important main points that we talked about. Now this kind of exercise, I think the idea is, I'm not going to do this every week necessarily, but we will do from time to time. I think as you can see from tonight's class, why it's important to read the articles, especially ahead of time, to engage in the discussion. And then again, these kind of questions are good exam questions. So this is also a help for you to see and to prepare a little bit for what could be on a final exam, for example, just from a practical perspective. Okay, but these are the kind of things we want to take away from this type of an article. These are the sort of major things, major issues that the article covers. So you did a good job. I didn't give you a lot of time. You know, I just gave you a few minutes to really go through it, and I'm sure many of you probably didn't read it ahead of time, so you had to go back and look through it and so forth. So again, just to get us thinking about it, to get us reflecting on the content. And I'll find a way to leave this up. So if you want to refer back to it, you can refer back to it. The link is there, so you can just go back and use the link. Okay. So any questions before we depart for the week? Final thoughts?
Prof,
yeah.
When you are going to share the outline for the assignment number 2?
Okay, yeah, that'll be in the coming weeks. Yeah, maybe next week or the following week. I can do that. In fact, I have it. I can just upload it first, and then we can discuss it in class. I'll make a note to do that. Okay.
Sorry, Prof. I don't know how to sign up the attendance on the Future Blast.
If you just click the link, you just have to click on it, and then automatically it records the attendance.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, that's all.
So we just click the links. That's it.
Yeah, just click the link. That's all.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Okay, so let's see. Next week we have who are our presenters next week? Fatin, Nabila, and Roshakina. Okay, so you guys are up next week. All right, so I think next week's article is a little bit on the long side. So Amira and Mutiara, you did a very nice job with your slides. So especially as the first group, it's always, you know, you're not really sure what to do. So you did a very nice job. So congratulations. So yeah, again, just like what they did, try to summarize. Just try to summarize. You don't, of course, you're not going to cover everything in the article. Just try to summarize the main points, but try to go in the order of the article as it's presented. It's easier because as you guys present, I'm also looking at the article because I make a lot of notes to myself in the article, things that I want to share in the class. So it's just easier for me to follow and then for me to share if you just go in the order of the article. Sometimes students get ultra creative and they present things in different order, and which is great. It's fine. It's just that it's harder for me to assist with the lecture that way. So, all right.
All right.
Okay. So have a good week. Inshallah, see you all next week.
All right, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Prof.
Biasa.
Same
Thank you,
channel.
Prof.
Thank you. Assalamualaikum.
Thank you.
Oh,
Thank
Amira
you,
and
everyone.
Amira Mutiara, please don't forget to upload your slides, yeah, to the Puja Blast.
Okay,
I
okay.
think I'll make some amendments according to your comments
Yes.
previously.
To add capital, social.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. Good night.
Thank you, Prof.
Bye.
Thank you.
Assalamualaikum.
Wassalam.